Good morning. Hello. Welcome, everybody. This is TechShare Pro 2022. I'm Mark Walker from AbilityNet, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to our first session at the start of 3 days of conference and community building and connecting up and learning and sharing. So I'm really pleased that you've joined us. We had over 1,500 people sign up, so we know there's a huge interest in this topic. And we're back again to do some more of the good stuff that we've done over the last 6 years. This is the 6th year that we've done TechShare Pro. So I'm hugely proud of everything that we've done, and I hope you have a good 3 days and learn a huge amount from what we're doing. I've got 2 guests with me here who we're going to have a very brief introduction, and then we're going to crack on with the keynote. So Christopher Patnoe from Google, Mali Fernando from HSBC. Christopher, lead sponsor this year, thank you so much for all your support. But it's a strange time for accessibility, I think. We were talking about this, just the changes going on around us, and particularly in the big tech companies.
Yeah.
So the next 3 days is, I think, about community building, and I think that's probably a theme, isn't it, to try and connect and join up and support one another.
For me, it's one of the things that's most important about the work that we do. We are better together than apart. You have companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft coming together for something like the Accessibility Speech Project, which we'll talk about tomorrow, or just simply trying to push the standards forward, trying to make things easier to do, make it better for everyone. And we do this together because no one company, no one organization, no one charity can do this by themselves, because the world is a big and complicated place. And by working together, we have that chance to do it. Coming together here for TechShare Pro, we get to learn together. We get to learn the same stories, the nouns, the verbs. We get inspired by people. We get to learn what not to do from the stories of other people. So it's a really important way to really dial in how we want to behave, how we want to teach, how we want to grow.
Brilliant, fantastic, thank you. Mali, fantastic to have HSBC on board as well. We obviously work together really closely, AbilityNet and HSBC. But as Christopher says, it's a complicated world, and your world in banking and finance and all the services you're doing, millions of customers, it's a hugely complicated business to be in, but accessibility for you is right at the heart of the work that you're doing. So can you tell me a little bit about where that is? We're going to hear from your CEO soon. He's going to be bigging up all the work you're doing. But from your point of view, these 3 days, how does that sort of fit into the jigsaw of stuff that you're learning and working on?
Of course. So look, I mean, it's an absolute pleasure to meet folk like Chris. You know, we benefit from some of the work they do upstream in terms of being able to supply services to our customers. We've got 40 million customers around the world. Financial inclusion is imperative. I think, you know, organizations, particularly banks, sometimes have to realize the privilege we have, the ability to either provide greater independence or take away independence from an individual. And that's really important. Financial independence lends so much to everybody else. As an organization, we've got a very bold and simple vision. We want to be the world's most digitally accessible bank. And to be really explicit, we want to be the bank of choice for disabled and neurodiverse customers. And we want to be the employer of choice for disabled and neurodiverse staff. And earlier this year, we wanted to see how we were doing. So we came to yourselves to say, look, how are we doing across the world? And I think we asked the question in our top 13 personal banking markets, tell us independently how we're doing. And look, I'm really proud to say in 11 of those top 13 markets, we're the most accessible website. But it isn't about being the best. I think what's more important is, particularly in Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, we are possibly the only digitally accessible bank. So that means actually if you have certain types of disabilities and you want to bank online, you don't really have the same sort of choice that you do in places like the UK, in the US. So we have a real obligation not just to do the right thing by our own customers and our people. I love the spirit of community. And you know, some of the things we'll talk about over the next few days is how it is we are giving our stuff away. And we want to really open source our skills, expertise. We are by no means perfect, but we really want to open up what we have and give to the world. We're not asking for anything in return.
Fantastic, thank you. And so what we've got first, thank you so much, both of you. What we've got first is an amazing start. Mali, you helped make this happen, so it's fantastic. We've got Ian Stuart, who's the CEO, UK CEO for HSBC Bank, and Alex Mahon, who's the CEO of Channel 4, talking about why they and their businesses invest in inclusion. I think it really sets the scene of exactly the stuff you're talking about, Mali. Why would you do this? Why is this important? It creates the starting conversation for us in our work we do as a community. So, roll VT.
Hello, I'm Adi Latif, and welcome to this opening session at TechShare Pro 2022. I'm very excited. I've got 2 amazing guests with me today, and we're going to be talking about digital inclusion, diversity, accessibility, all those lovely, lovely buzzwords. So first of all, we've got Stuart here from HSBC UK. He's the CEO of HSBC UK, so it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Ian. And we've got Alex Mahon. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've checked on YouTube a number of times, so I hope that's okay. And Alex is the CEO of Channel 4. Welcome both to this session today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks very much, Adi.
Thank you.
So today's a discussion. We're just going to have a little discussion, and I've got a couple of topics we're going to be discussing. I've got a few prompts. Just to kick off, as business leaders, what value do you place on digital inclusion, disability, accessibility, and the need to make your services accessible? So if it's okay, Alex, are you happy to kick off with that?
Yeah, I am. Well, first of all, as you know, part of the mission and the purpose of Channel 4 is about making real and positive change. And it's about representation in society for people who are not always heard, you know, particularly the underrepresented and people who are treated inequitably. And clearly there's a massive fit with disabled people in the UK there, because we're not in a position as a society where there's equal understanding representation yet, although we hope to do that. So for us, that's about, of course, how we communicate with the public and access services and all of that, but it's also about changing hearts and minds in terms of how we represent in programming, because we have the ability to make an impact on audiences and people across the UK. And of course, it's also about our own workforce and what we do for colleagues there.
I think that's it's great you understand it's for your customers, but also for your colleagues. And I think a lot of the times that can be forgotten. It's outside and inside. Ian, how about yourself at HSBC? What's your drive for accessibility? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Adi, thank you very much. Well, first of all, we've got a very simple purpose in HSBC. If you go onto any of our websites, you'll see the words opening up a world of opportunity. That's the purpose. We want to open up that opportunity for all our customers. We've got 15 million customers in the UK today, but at no point in that purpose does it say that it's not available to people with a disability. We want to open up the opportunities for everyone. And it's quite interesting because when I got involved in the Ability network in the bank here, it was really prompted by the fact that I've got 4 children, 3 of whom have got a disability. And I didn't products, different services. So from a customer perspective, the whole challenge for us is to make sure our customers can get access as easily as anyone else to these products. But then once you start to really scratch away at this subject, you realize that most people pick up their disability during their working lives, so between 18 and 65. And we have to adapt to make sure that people can, as they pick up disabilities, move to products that suit them. So it's a really interesting challenge. And then it goes all the way around to how do we look after people in the workplace with disability. And there's some obvious stuff like how you amend their chairs and how people sit at their desks, to people like me who without my glasses, I can't see anything. So are we giving people the right apparatus to enlarge their print and all these simple things that a few years ago you maybe wouldn't have thought about? So it's exciting times, but it's hugely challenging. I think Alex just touched on it there. We've really got ourselves into this mindset now of, hold on, how will people access this if they've got a disability? So it's challenging, but I think we've made a lot of progress over the last few years, and technology has played a key part in that.
Thank you. That mindset, is that at Channel 4, Alex? Is that something that keeps you up at night at times as well? You know, how are we going to make it accessible? Obviously, there's quite a focus on digital. We're becoming a digital first world, and so to make your digital accessible, is that something that is on your mind at Channel 4? Is that something that you do spend time and research into looking at?
Yeah, I think it's always about, the question for us is always about how can you do better and how can you do more and how can you try, because I'm really lucky, it's like part of our job, how can you try to set the standard or put the bar higher? So let me give a couple of examples for that. Of course, we are about 100% of subtitles on our shows. That's what we should be doing. We've got a lot of audio described programming, also what we should be doing. And then, of course, we also have programs which are signed, particularly important for those who can't access elsewhere. But then what's the next step? Well, how many of the shows, how do you balance that? What do you add to those services? I think that to some degree is relatively simple because you can set a target for it. Things that you can set a target for are a bit easier as when you're running something. The harder stuff is how do you make sure that colleagues are treated well in the business? So how do you make sure that people are really taking into account access requirements, or our staff are really aware of how to be inclusive? That's the much harder work day to day in organizations, I think. Are people really making reasonable adjustments? Do they know what reasonable adjustments they should be making? Have they understood things from the perspective of others? Have they understood how hard it is to get someone to come to work with you as a signer, and what that might involve and what the struggle might be like for someone to get that? The stuff that is incredible that galvanizes people, though, is where we do things like work on the Paralympics, because we have the power through that to change people's minds. So, since we've started doing the Paralympics, 84% of Paralympics viewers in the UK said that the coverage has helped improve their understanding of disabled people. So that's immense. We have a massive privilege, and I know HSBC do too when they do advertising campaigns and other things. We have the privilege and the opportunity to change huge amounts of people's minds, and connecting that back to our own staff and what we do on air is important. And we've been able to do things there, not just through that show the athletes, but we've moved to 100% of the presenters on the last Paralympics being people with a disability. And we're moving to the crews behind the camera, 30% or more people with a disability. So that starts to change things throughout the system. It takes time, but those sort of things are the things that starts to change minds throughout the UK.
Yeah, I think it's incredible, because a lot of the times in the disabled community, people are used to non-disabled people talking on their behalf and delivering them services, and to actually have disabled people involved, behind the scenes, and to be able to deliver such amazing. The Paralympics were just an incredible feat on TV. It was just absolutely amazing. So to have disabled people as part of that, because I know I'll never be a Paralympian, but if I work behind the scenes on something, then there's hope there. So to provide that opportunity is incredible. Ian, Alex has mentioned some of the great work that's happened at Channel 4. Is there things that you're proud of at HSBC? And is there any sort of value you've seen from the accessibility and disability related work that's taking place?
Let me give Sainsbury's a shout out here. When I think back to where we were as a company, or an industry in 2012, I think we were poor. But we really learned a lot from what Sainsbury's did for the Paralympics back 10 years ago. It feels like yesterday, but it's 10 years ago. And that gave us a jolt that thought, well, if they can do it, why can't we do it? And I think this is great, and that's why we share so much information. So the things that we've been doing, and we've done a lot of the things that I would say are now sort of like that just gets you, it's like table stakes, making sure you've got the right support for people with disabilities, all that. And the products, be it braille on the cards or little bits out of the credit card so people know which credit card it is. These are all table stakes. Then you get into the more complex area, which is how do you hire people into your organization who've got disabilities? And we've really struggled with that, because a very standard process, you go online, you fill in the forms. But if you're disabled, that can be really difficult. So I'll give you an example. For a lot of people, when you've got to do identification, upload your driving license. a lot of people with disability don't have a driving license. So at that point, they come out of the system. So we've had to really look at some of the ways we recruit people. And if you had my team in here today who really do all the great work behind this, they would highlight a few things that we've managed to do in the last, I would say, 6 to 12 months to make that process easier. So trying to make it short and to the point, and then from there, marry up the skills that people have got with the opportunities that we've got. And so far, we've had some really good success with that. But I'm not at the stage of celebrating it yet, because I still think we've got a long way to go. But I think in the next year, maybe 2 years, we'll have many more disabled people right across our network. And I really look forward to seeing the results. And as I say, I would say it's going to be more of a 2-year program.
Lovely, Ian. And that's really important. It's really good to see that it is quite a challenging process, as quite a lot of organizations find recruiting people with disabilities. But you seem to have got the right advice, and you're making ground in this area. Alex, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you've got a lot of people within Channel 4, when, for example, when you're working on the Paralympics, disabled people working for you. How was it for you to recruit disabled people, and what was the kind of approach that you took?
I think in terms of recruiting them into the industry, we work with specialist agencies. So I work with a whole program that we run called 4 Skills, which is about bringing young people into the television and media industries. They have been traditionally fairly exclusive industries in terms of people's background, for all kinds of reasons. In fact, the only industry that's been more exclusive in terms of background, class, etc., has been medicine and law, which is shocking when you consider, I mean, the media shouldn't be that complicated. It's really just working out what people want to watch on telly. It's hard, all kinds of people should be able to come into it. But that's how it's been. So 4 Skills is a program that is like getting to 15,000 young people a year. And we are very much over-indexing to people for whom the industries have seemed inaccessible. So people with a disability, working class, people from the nations and regions, different ethnicities. That's our focus, as you might expect. But we work with a load of specialist agencies who help us bring in the brightest and the best and ensure that we're creating the best possible conditions for them to be a success in the industry. And often they work with us and then they go on. So we have a creative diversity team that reaches out and does that. I think that the sort of differences that we make, and Ian touched on it there about the difference it makes if someone's working in a branch and they're in a wheelchair, because it's not just the difference it makes to them, is it? It's the difference it makes to everyone they deal with who suddenly adjusts their preconceptions. It's not that they're necessarily prejudiced, they've just got preconceptions. So those are the differences. And we've just introduced this thing called the Disability Code of Portrayal, which is a first in the industry, which is about focusing on changing the representation of people with a disability on air. So moving from perhaps what we've seen before, presenters on the Paralympics, presenters in the last leg, to thinking about how we strengthen on-screen representation, casting disabled actors in disabled roles, but also portraying well-rounded characters. So moving from perhaps the character being about the disability, which we would, call the obvious, to much more of presenting the disabled on air. Because the truth is, it's like 22%, 1 in 5 in the UK are people with a disability. But when we look at roles on air, if you look at advertisements, and we did a big study, only 4% of TV advertisements in the UK feature a person with a disability, and only 1% have disabled people in a lead role. So you've got to run the data, set the targets, work harder. We have to work harder as organizations to recruit, but then the impact in terms of how you change perception and how we make society a fairer place is quite spectacular when that pays off.
It's amazing. We work with a lot of companies where we try and help them with the AbilityNet. We try and help them with their accessibility strategy. And a lot of the times it's passionate people in an organization. They might not be very high up in the organization, but they want to make it accessible and inclusive. They face barriers a lot of the time to get themselves heard, to get buy-in from the top. I mean, is there is there any sort of advice you would give if someone wanted to get the attention of the people at the top, to get the budget, to get the resources behind it? What's the best way of doing that?
Well, I'll tell you how it works in our organisation. Usually, and I'm saying 9 times out of 10, somebody has an idea, and if they've been blocked somewhere, it pretty quickly gets up to my desk, and I will try and release the energy to make it happen. And we're working on something right now, which I think is a terrific idea. So we've got various health plans in the organisation, but for not a lot of money, we can give people screening at a much younger age. And it's kind of the arguments, because somebody's come with a really good debate and argument on this. It's now more a case of, well, why wouldn't you do it? It does cost money, but it's so good, and it'll be so good for our colleagues to have access to this. It's just a sensible idea. And most of the ones that come, they're really good, sound, logical ideas. Now, don't get me wrong, you will get some where you've just got to make a really tough call and go, we just can't do that. It's not in our gift, it's too complex. But most of the time, people will come up with the solutions and you can make it work. The big one is always, can we afford to do it? If somebody wants to completely rebuild a campus, that gets quite expensive. If you want to completely rebuild your IT infrastructure, that's quite expensive. So you've got to sort of park those ones and make sure you focus in on what we can sort out here and now with goodwill and good judgment. And honestly, I'm always blown away by just how good the ideas are that come up to my desk.
I suppose I would say, I might say this because I'm in this business, try and tell a story, because disabled people are valuable. And generally, some of the problem is ignorance, that leaders don't realize that, or they haven't come across it, or they don't know someone, or they don't have a relative, or they haven't realized. So try and tell a story about a particular person, or someone that you know, or someone that could make a difference, because often that's what kind of melts the ice and brings someone into it as a leader. That's what the difference can make. That's what we try and do with Stuff on Air, right? Rosie Jones, we've got on loads of shows. Once you've listened to her, you realize she can be really funny, and people wouldn't have realized that before. They didn't believe that someone with cerebral palsy could be like that. It's the individual things where you meet one person and then perhaps you realize that you haven't been giving people a chance. So tell a story so that people realize how valuable individuals are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much both for coming on and having this conversation. It's been really, really invaluable for me. I probably should be asking lots of other things, which I haven't. So, but hopefully we'll keep the conversation going. And yeah, thank you so much for coming along.
I looked at them a lot.
That's fantastic, isn't it? What a brilliant way to kick off the conference. Those two very passionate leaders. Just talking us through how it all fits for them and their big, the big organisations that they're leading, and where it fits into the jigsaw. So, cast my mind back 6 years to the beginning of TechShare Pro, and a lot of work that we did at that point was trying to make the case for accessibility and inclusion. I think we've moved on from there now. I think the world around us has changed for lots of obvious reasons. But hearing those leaders and hearing them talk about the similarities and differences in their organisations and what accessibility means to them, I think that's a kicking off point for us. So I'm pleased to say Mali's still with me, and I've also got Adi Latif from AbilityNet, who you will have seen talking there to the leaders. So Mali, we've just seen the CEO telling us that the work you're doing is important. Out on the platform, we've got everybody working in a similar business to us in the accessibility industry. So how do you translate that buy-in in a sort of nuts and bolts sense into activity? What does it look like when you're doing the work that you're doing? And I think the other bit, we were just talking about winning the hearts and minds. That's a key part of it, isn't it? Can you tell us a bit about where that fits into the plans you're working on?
I'll ask you your second question first, if that's all right. The hearts and minds arguably is as important as the technology, right? I remember when we first started doing these things and trying to make the bank accessible, the questions I used to get were quite interesting. What is digital accessibility? Can somebody who's blind really use a smartphone, Mali? Why do we have to do this? Can't we get to it at some point in the future? And then I met this handsome gentleman on my left, Adi Latif, and the two of us, started kind of quite literally with some of the other colleagues like Robin Christophson, changing the culture. As I always say, if you win hearts and minds, the ones and zeros will follow. And that's really important. And Adi and I do a simple double act. we talk about the what, the why, and what the bank is doing, which I'll speak to in just a moment. But actually bringing disabled customers and users into your organization and demonstrating the power of good accessibility, but also what a barrier bad accessibility can present, whether it's banking, whether it's airlines, whether it's something as simple as doing your grocery shopping is really powerful. I don't know, Adi, if you want to add to that before I kind of get into the sort of practitioner's view.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times people, when it comes to accessibility, can get a little bit confused. That, it can be quite a technical thing, but the little, I guess, demonstration I do in some of the sessions I've had with you at the bank is just simply just showing someone, hey, I'm blind. Eyes don't work, but if I touch my phone screen, it talks. And look, I can use this app. It works really well. Oh, but look, this app doesn't work. So I'm still blind. I'm still using this talking phone, but this app doesn't work. So this is a digital barrier I'm facing, which is making me disabled. So I think that's the point we make. I'm not disabled because I'm blind. I'm disabled because my needs as a blind person are not being met here. And so I think that's what we demonstrate in our sessions quite well.
Indeed. And Mark, in terms of specifics, we've got sort of 5 or 6 very simple pillars to our strategy. The first is, user research. You have to have disabled and neurodiverse users who are part and parcel of your process, all the way from our brand to how it is we build products and services. Training and awareness, I think, Adi, you and I did 50 or 60 events last year to about 15,000 people. Wasn't bad, was it? We should sell tickets. But also providing the right technical skills, right? This isn't the kind of thing that's been taught in universities. We have thousands of developers across the world, and they're coming in without these skills. So actually, we train about 2,000 people a year. And an offer I'd like to make to the audience watching us here is, actually, look, we are by no means perfect. We do not have all the answers here at HSBC. Well, we've been on our own journey, and very much like some of the other speakers and the concept of community, we reckon we're in a position of privilege because we are able to invest in this space in a way that some other organizations do not or cannot. So actually, if you would like to learn, if you would like the training, the knowledge, I would like to offer that to your organization. We do not ask for anything in return. We don't want your commercial accounts. We don't want any publicity. I don't even want a LinkedIn post. If you want to tell us actually how this has benefited somebody, whether it's a customer or one of your employees, just so that actually we're able to partake in the pleasure of making a real difference, we'd love to hear about that. The third is, look, change the DNA of the organization. We're making our comms accessible. We're changing our procurement process. And that's particularly important because ultimately, while these might be fintechs or third-party products and services, these are ultimately our customers and our people. But we also recognize that when we take a really strong stance with a supplier, we benefit other organizations who buy that same platform or service. And then, look, we do a lot. We're making our own internal systems accessible. This is really important. We employ 250,000 people across the world. 7% of our UK workforce have identified as being disabled. We want to make sure that every employee, irrespective of their disability or ability, gets a fair opportunity at HSBC, not just to come in and do a job, but to thrive. And lastly, this is part of our policy, right? It doesn't come down to an individual in terms of, do you agree with the concept of digital accessibility? It doesn't matter. That conversation is beyond us. This is just simply how we do business. We will be accessible. Otherwise, we are not going to launch something. And really what I'd love to do is, continue to work with some of the fantastic people at this conference, but also offer what we have to the world. Because actually, as Chris mentioned earlier on the segment, this is really about a community. It's a partnership. It isn't about one organization trying to solve all the world's problems.
Yeah, cool, fantastic. Well, and speaking of that, we're going to hear from Caroline Casey at Valuable 500, of which HSBC is a member, of course. So we've had Caroline, she joined us the last time we were face-to-face, she joined us on stage in 2019. Valuable 500 has been on quite a journey since then, so I caught up with her to find out what they're doing and how it's growing now.
So Caroline, it's brilliant to see you. This is another virtual event, sadly. We met when you came to London for TechShare Pro in 2019, which was just one of the highlights of what we've done with TechShare Pro, really, all those amazing people in a room. I've got some amazing people in the room with us here, the virtual room that we're going to be joining. But it's 3 years on, and what's happening in Valuable 500, you're a year beyond the big announcements last year. where are things at for you guys now? You must be turning a corner into a new sort of phase of your work.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be back, though 3 years ago feels like 7 years ago in some ways.
Yeah.
So, you know, as I was saying, that we are sort of 15 months out from achieving the 500 and building that unique global collective, which I believe is the second biggest collective in the world after UN Global Compact. And really to have the accountability of the CEOs in it, that makes it fabulous. But where are we? Well, now we have to go deep, right? So what do you do with this collective? Building it was a campaign to end CEO silence and build in C-suite accountability. And now we have this extraordinary, powerful collective, which is like 22 million employees in 64 sectors in 41 countries and all the big, yeah. And so where are we? So how do we use this community to deliver impact? So we're having the really hard conversations with ourselves. You know, what we thought we could do, and we've done a year's nearly action research with our companies and with our iconic companies. And it's that kind of place of what, yeah, but is that good enough? Is that really going to drive the system change? So we're at that point of saying what's really working and going towards the hard pieces and not just doing things for the sake of doing things. Do you know what I mean? So it's tough conversations. We're knee deep in strategy. But what I think we've really come to own is what is the very only thing that we can do to drive systemic change, or not to, maybe to catalyze systemic change. And I think what we can do is work on synchronized collective action of our 500 against 2 or 3 big barriers. And, you know, if I had said this 2 years ago, I go, that's too little, that's too little. Well, actually, stop, focus, and go deep. And I think that's where we are now, and really trying to find those areas where a company at any level, whether it's beginning, scaling, or leading, can be part of that 500 synchronized collective action.
Well, and I mean, how far do you feel we've really come? We're both immersed in this day in, day out. We're through the pandemic, as far as we can tell at the moment. There was a big sort of explosion of empathy that we all talked about this time last year. Mm-hmm. Is there a lasting effect of that? Is stuff drifting backwards, do you think, broadly in your barometer?
Oh, well, I think, look, don't we all agree there was empathy for sure, but then there was also a dialing back on, you know, when we've got to realize in the UK alone, 6 out of 10 people who died from COVID had disabilities. We heard about the non-resuscitation clause. You know, people with disabilities couldn't get the access to things that they needed for their life. So in some ways, there was in business where we saw business accommodate, I'm doing air quotes here, for everyone. And we looked at everybody's needs and we could move to remote working. We started to understand what captioning is, and it is a crime against humanity to go online and not caption. So those are some good things. But in other things, we saw still the lack of valuing the disability community as a hugely powerful community and a valuable part of the community. So where I kind of think we are is, I think we are all challenging ourselves, aren't we? Look, we don't want to have poster child or man and women for in front of a camera. We no longer are willing just to tolerate, we might consider doing an accessible conference. There is a lack of tolerance now, I think, which is brilliant and is really pushing and forcing change. I see disability certainly more in strategic conversations. And I was saying to you, the word disability and strategic, like, when did that actually happen? And people didn't roll their eyes to heaven. That's actually happening. We are seeing CEOs really put money behind it. We are actually seeing companies put global disability leads with budgets. That's the good stuff. Can I give you the bad stuff? In our valuable 500 companies, only 6 of our companies have chief accessibility officers. We know that only 8% of our companies all text and Twitter. So, I mean, it's like this all the time. But what I do think is happening, we are now in the rooms, some of the rooms, right? We might not be taking up all the space, but we're pushing. And I think that young generation as well, don't underestimate it. with social media and language and a sense of pride and honor, that dimension has very much changed as well.
We also said about the tech community and the stuff that we're familiar with in TechShare. I think there is this accessibility connect is maybe softer for some people than it is in other more competitive areas where we may not see people joining up as easily across commercial boundaries. And, you know, TechShare Pro has benefited from a sense of community within the accessibility world, as much as AbilityNet has directly in terms of the work we do on our own. And I think that's part of that saying, you know, there's the good news stuff part of the picture, isn't it? We're beginning to see more of those things come to fruition. Reading yesterday about Google, Apple, Microsoft, I think, working on voice technologies for people with different accents and so on. So, I mean, and in TechShare Pro, we're obviously looking ahead to how we connect up and work together. That's the point of the whole conference, is to bring people together. So I guess in terms of your next steps, how are you going to create that sense of community? Are there steps that we're going to be able to do to support that? How can we work to enable the Valuable 500 mission? Are there particular things you can see lining up for us to get behind?
Well, so once again, I often think about this idea of convening behind or putting energy behind one or two, three things. And as I said, you will hear what we're calling our companies to do and the communities. I think, to your point, I think accessibility and digital accessibility we have used that as a really strong entry point into the broader work across the value chain. It's because it's a place because of digital acceleration and uptake, we're all experiencing that, and that sort of design in hopefully from the beginning. So you're probably in the strongest position. You, the community that you are, the way that you work together are not a brilliant and an exciting example of collaboration, but it's what we need to see outside your work as well. And when I think about, there's a brilliant piece, I can't wait till you all hear, L'Oreal and Google will be announcing an incredible piece of inclusive digital beauty, which will be coming out. And you see that kind of collaboration. I'm really excited to hear that happen. Yeah. But I also want to just give a cautionary note. We did a piece of work with Tortoise. There's two statistics that terrify me in this. A third of our FTSE 100 companies still do not have accessible websites. You know, and not compliance is a dirty word as far as I'm concerned, but that is just insane, right? It really is ridiculous. And the other one is the issue around self-ID. We have to get underneath this, because can you believe in our FTSE 100 companies, again, there is nobody in a senior leadership position above who's identifying of having a disability. Now, that is problematic. So I think there's a piece, we've got to focus on what we're seeing as a good place to learn off, which is a lot of the work that you do. But we have to look at, why are we not having cultures where disability is being covered and hidden, or you have the choice to or you want to, and what is hidden is not dealt with. And that's incredibly important. I think we have to keep our eye on that always.
Yeah. I mean, it's been great catching up with you. I know so much stuff goes on in our separate worlds that crosses over in loads of different ways, but just catching up even now, just reminding ourselves, hey, there's loads of work to be done. This conference for us is obviously something that comes up once a year for us to pull a load of things together. You're doing that all the time through the Valuable 500. Anything we can do, where the community belongs in your world, you know, let's make sure we keep building those bridges and making sure that we're sort of headed in the same direction. But it's been wonderful catching up with you. And I think you've given us a rallying cry for the next 3 days worth of work. You know, you've got a long way to go.
We do, but I just want to say for everybody in the TechShare community and anybody outside it, I think we need to take an example of what you do and how you collaborate, because that scarcity model at the expense of somebody else is very, very heightened at the moment. So the more that we can prove that collaboration does work and is beneficial to all, I think that's where we're at as a world and a society right now. So I just want to say it's brilliant to see the work you all are doing. And yeah, let's look at the next year ahead and see what trouble we can cause.
Brilliant. Lovely to see you. Take care.
She's brilliant, isn't she? The Valuable 500 program is amazing, and Caroline really built that. In those 3 years since we were first met in 2019, that the Valuable 500 has grown enormously and really hitting a different gear now. And as she said, I think it's important for all of us in the community to connect up and find ways of building bridges So anything that you're doing, and have a look at the Valuable 500 website. There's loads of great messaging in there that we can pick up and reuse. Loads of really interesting creative stuff about disability and inclusion. And there's a really strong connection with accessibility, but it's not only about technology. So I think it really plays into our hands in the community to be amplifying and sharing their stories and finding ways to work with them. So I've got with me Amy Lowe from AbilityNet, a colleague. We're going to catch up on a very different end of the spectrum, really, is about the experience of disabled people. So the whole point of us being here in TechShare Pro is that somebody on the other end of this does something more independently, is able to do something they couldn't do before, that the app that they want to use is actually accessible. Loads of different points that we're trying to reach. But the work that we're doing on our free services area around working with devices, that's something that came out of the pandemic, about that real lack of ability for people to be able to get the support they need when they've got the devices. So could you tell me a little bit about the DCMS project? The Department of Culture, Media and Sports.
Always a difficult one
Good one to get
right
in there. And a little bit about how that came about, and also what the impact of it was, and some of the amazing numbers that came out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it's always quite frustrating that the people who stand to gain the most from access to technology quite often have, fairly insurmountable hurdles. It might be that they just don't think technology is right for them, increasingly financial pressures as well to being able to get a device and get a device that's suitable and adapted to meet their needs. And then there are other barriers that might relate to confidence and training and all of those things. So you're absolutely right, it's something that AbilityNet have been doing for 25 years, isn't it? Helping individuals to find the right technology, adapt it to meet their needs, and so on. But during the pandemic, there's an awful lot of people doing some fantastic work in the digital inclusion space, but it absolutely exploded during the pandemic because suddenly all those human get-arounds that people were accessing to be able to just manage in day-to-day life were swept away. And I think it was really stark. And from that, the DCMS project came about, which was, there was some evidence that came together quite quickly that really shone a light on the fact that people living with learning disabilities were being disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Health outcomes, isolation, really very difficult times. And the DCMS project brought together Good Things Foundation, AbilityNet, and I think it was about 160 community organisations across the country to get devices into the hands of people living with a learning disability, providing additional technology, so from simple things such as styluses to help people to be able to use the technology more easily, to eye gaze, all sorts of add-ons that were really allowing people to use the tablets very independently. And I think we ended up 5,500 devices were distributed through these community organisations. And, what's also happened is beyond that project, which was an emergency response to try and address some of those effects of the pandemic, we've got long-term relationships now with all of those community organisations and the people working in those groups who perhaps before the pandemic were broadly offering support in person, have now got digital or hybrid alternatives so that people can choose now. We're back able to get together to access their services either way. So.
Yeah. And an important part of our process, I guess, is the volunteers. I mean, having all of those volunteers with the amazing skills. And to some extent, they pivoted a bit as well because we weren't really offering very much remote support, of course. They were going into people's homes. 350 odd, isn't it, that we have around the country?
Yeah.
So that's a big shift as well, of course, because they're now able to provide that support into someone who's got a device. And that's the type of support you're talking about, the changes when you can't see somebody, isn't it?
I think we surprised ourselves with what we were able to achieve remotely. There was support offered through Windows. There was people walking around with camera phones, chasing cables.
Okay.
You know, I mean, really amazing what you can achieve when an option's removed from you, isn't it? And I mean, our volunteers as well, it's the patience levels that they have and the way they very much approach supporting individuals from a perspective of really explaining to them to give them confidence and independence in the future. So where somebody might say, oh, my grandson comes in and he sort of changes everything and I don't know what he's done, it's very sort of calm, methodical, and then gives people that independence and confidence, but they know they've got access to that volunteer if something else crops up.
Yeah. And so we've got, I mean, we call it our devices program, I guess, and we were saying that, because we're the link in that bit, if you hand somebody a device, then they still need the support, and the volunteers are the key ingredient of that. But we've now got this new program that we're going to be talking about, meeting Matt. So this is a new sort of way of us showing how we fit into the jigsaw, I think, isn't it? That there are people looking for support, there are people offering devices, and we sit in the middle of that to provide the connecting up, and as do a lot of people, I'm sure, in the conference, just providing that confidence building, as you say. So can you tell me a bit about the Connecting You project and where that's going next? Because that's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I won't steal Matt from Lenovo's thunder, but yes, this is another digital inclusion project. Again, we have rounded up some amazing partners right across the UK, so from housing associations to local councils. I mean, local councils in particular, digitisation of their services is marching on, and it's really, really important that they're taking into account digitally excluded citizens when they're doing that, but also a wide range of charities, Parkinson's UK, Sense, Stroke Association, so all similar kind of model to the DCMS project. I think we've got a range of Chromebooks and tablets and distributing those to individuals, older and disabled people, with that wraparound support and confidence building. And the nice thing with the AbilityNet service is that although we do these projects, that support is available ongoing, and also our helpline and our online resources. So they're never, no one's ever left kind of high and dry if they encounter a new puzzling issue.
Cool, and I'm pleased to say we've got Matt coming in, I think, have we? Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Good morning, guys.
Hi, how are you doing? You're our first remote call in today, so we're checking the technology's working. We can see you. Can you see us?
I can. It looks warmer in London than it is in Yorkshire today, anyway.
It's bucketing down here, Matt. If you could look out the window. Yeah, it's absolutely tipping. But welcome to TechShare Pro. Lovely to see you.
Oh, likewise, and it's been a really inspiring opening to the event. I've really enjoyed the content so far, so I'm looking forward to the next couple of days as well. Thanks for having us on.
So yes, we've just talked a little bit about the Connecting You project, but it would be brilliant to hear from your perspective, Matt, how this whole project came about and how we connected and what happened next.
Yeah, that's a great word. Connections, connected. So really, our story starts with the lockdown and the pandemic. We saw unprecedented demand for technology, particularly from the emergency services and schools, but also from organisations trying to reach the most digitally disadvantaged citizens. Now, we weren't experts at all in understanding those issues that were there with the most digitally disadvantaged citizens, until we came across AbilityNet, really. And it was conversations with AbilityNet that helped us understand and educate us around how deep that issue really was. And it wasn't really about lack of access to devices. And as you and Mark have been discussing, there's sort of a triangle of 3 barriers that those citizens face. One being the device and access to the right device, but connectivity, 1 million households without the internet, but also the vital role that support and training and digital coaching has as well in bridging that digital divide. So we got educated a lot by your colleagues, and we took a step back and we decided to look for partnerships and communities that can help provide all the other key elements and take those barriers away, and we can do our bit, which is the device.
And it's been really successful. I was catching up with Sarah Brain, our free services manager, about the project, and she was saying how it's been going so well, and some of the quotes that we've had from beneficiaries, you know, it's the range of things that people are able to do. So, you know, from enjoyable things like streaming music or being able to watch the programs that they enjoy without arguing over the remote with family members, but then really practical things like filling out online forms rather than having to write things out and post them off in the with the cost of living situation as well. People have been able to shop around for the best price for things, which just really wasn't accessible to them before. And so, yeah, it's just a non-stop incoming refrain about how life-changing it is to be able to have their own device as well. One lady from, I think it was, where was it from? A lady in Leeds anyway. She's part of a community group that offers work placements to adults with learning disabilities. And she said, I never thought I'd have my own computer. And she's been absolutely flying. So you're making an enormous difference.
Well, we couldn't do it without your help. And I think it is just a first step for organisations like Lenovo. We've got a much deeper understanding of the challenges now. It's not about access to any technology, it's about access to the right technology as well. So there are other emerging technologies that could become vital for citizens in the future. So we're keen to play a long-term role in trying to make sure that we help with access and smarter technology for all citizens.
Well, we've absolutely loved working with you, so we hope to be able to continue that, definitely. And I think it's a really good point about how new technologies are coming to help support people, but also technology is forever advancing. So, you know, in our quest to close that digital divide, we do just need to keep running faster and faster. But when we spoke the other day, we were talking about, and Christopher mentioned it at the beginning, that no one organisation can achieve this by themselves. And our community is just amazing how it comes together, you know, working side by side and in really innovative ways to make a big difference. Did you have any questions?
No, I think that's fantastic. We've got a lunch and learn session about the project to delve deeper into the partnership later on today. But Matt, I just wanted to say thank you. I think that having partnerships with organisations like Lenovo, and it's also that bit about saying, yeah, we needed to learn something. We need to, you know, we all in the partnership needed to learn something. I think that's probably the root of it, isn't it? Trying to work out what works for the person that we're trying to support. It's not a big picture thing. It's right down at the very close to looking at them and their lives and how to reach them, how to connect with them. A lot of the work we do with the partners is charities that are already supporting individuals that have help that we couldn't reach any other way. So all of that jigsaw is complicated. But if you can make it to the lunch and learn session, please do today, because that's a fantastic project and there's opportunities for all of us to connect up and learn what's working. And thank you, Matt, for joining us, and I'll look forward to catching up with you again at lunchtime. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So thanks, Amy. I think we've covered a huge amount there. We started with the CEOs. We've ended up with people using their tablets to stop fighting over the remote control. I think that gives you a sense of what TechShare Pro is all about and the breadth of the work that AbilityNet and all of the partners that we're working with are involved in. We're going to have a short break now. And 11 o'clock we'll be back with Sarah Herrlinger from Apple, who's going to be telling us about their approach to innovation and inclusion, which I know is going to be a cracker. So I'll see you in about 4 or 5 minutes. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We had a great start there. What a fantastic opening hour of content, going from the CEOs through to helping individual people with disabilities in their own homes connect and live independent lives. I'm really pleased to say I've got Sarah here from Apple. Hi, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm great.
This
Thank
is your
you so much
third
for having me.
TechShare Pro as well, so I think you might get a special badge at some point. So, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to talk a bit about how Apple approaches accessibility, but can you tell me a little bit first about your role and how that fits into Apple's grand scheme of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Senior Director of Global Accessibility Policy and Initiatives at Apple, and in that role, my team works to make sure that every way that Apple presents itself to the world, whether that be through our products, our services, our stores, our workplace, original content for Apple TV Plus, whatever it might be, that we are treating everyone with dignity and respect.
Right, so really hugely, and not simple, from our point of view, simple technology-based accessibility, making the app accessible, that huge gamut of stuff, a huge range of...
Yeah,
it must be so interesting. It must be
really,
so much crosses your desk. It's so much stuff.
It does. Every day is different.
Yeah,
but really, it's in the accessibility realm, making sure that we just are good to people with disabilities, and that we do everything with keeping that in mind in all that we build.
Cool. And what do you think is the why of that? Why do you think Apple does that, from the point of view of your involvement in it and your sort of personal perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. You know, it certainly starts with the numbers. We know with over 1 billion people on this planet having a disability and 15% of the world's population, it's a huge part of our world, and it affects everyone, whether that is personally in your own experience or someone near and dear to you. So certainly disability is something that affects us all. But I think even more importantly, you know, Apple was built with a mission to make breakthrough products that change people's lives. And we didn't do that just for some people. We want to do that for everyone. And I think nowhere is that more evident than our work in accessibility. Our first Office of Disability started in 1985. And that was 5 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act even came to pass. And so I think that's a strong testament to the fact that we didn't do this because there was a regulatory statement of you must do it. We've done it because we believe that everybody is an important customer, and everybody should have the opportunity to use technology.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's also part of that winning hearts and minds story, is that that's much more powerful than making somebody do something, whatever it is they're doing in their work.
Absolutely.
If they get why they're doing it and what the value of it is, then of course they're much more motivated and connected to it.
Totally. I mean, I think accessibility work is some of the most creative work you can ever do. When you think about trying to go through so many different use cases. I mean, everybody's experience with their disability is unique. So even when we try and think about building new features, we have to think about how they all work together, and how do we make sure that no matter what your use case is, you have a way to be able to interact with that technology in what works best for you.
Yeah. And so the pandemic question, everybody has a different sort of stories, but I'm guessing, the scale of the business that you're in anyway, that would have affected the internal working, and also presumably the products and the shift in that understanding and empathy that you're building on. Everybody's perspective shifted in some way in terms of our knowledge of our customers' needs and all of that sort of stuff. What was your take on that over those few years? I mean, I guess we're still in it. We should always be careful to say that we're still in it. There's lots of stuff going on around us. So
very true. It'll be a long time that we'll still be in it in one form or another. Yeah, and I think as with everybody else, it was quite a swift change, trying to figure out how to continue to do everything in a completely virtual world. But the team did a quick pivot and really tried to figure out not just how to work in that world, but really to think about what the experience of all of our customers were in that new world, and try and come up with some great features to support that. So to give a visual aid or two, one of the things that we did was building out a feature called sound recognition for the deaf community, being able to give visual alerts when someone or when a sound was in the background. So whether that be anything from a fire alarm to a doorbell to a baby crying or water running, to be able to give them an alert via their Apple Watch or their Apple phone saying, there's a sound in the background that appears it might be water running. We also built in features like people detection, which was a really fun, cool project to work on because it allowed us to take some of the best of Apple in other areas and use it to support our communities. In this case, we're using the LiDAR scanner, which is a part of the Apple camera or the camera in the iPhone Pro models, also iPad Pros, to be able to understand proximity of someone to you. And it also takes some amazing machine learning algorithms to make this work as well. But in that world where we suddenly had to social distance, it allowed someone in the blind community to have a comprehension of when someone came into the frame of view of the camera, where they were, and give them a haptic alert, audio alert, visuals, even if you were someone who wasn't in the blind community, but you didn't know what 2 to 3 meters really was, you could be able to get that information as well. So, that was actually an interesting feature that came to us from one of our engineers who is blind, who originally just talked about wanting to know when a line moved. When he was queued up for something, when was it his turn to move forward? But when COVID happened, we fast-tracked that specific feature and got it out within months of the COVID timeframe to be able to help members of the blind community be able to better social distance.
Isn't it working?
I believe it is. I think I have
that all playing there?
Yeah, as far as I can tell. I think
I just realised it's playing up there. I was waiting for it to come up there.
Yeah, I assume
cool.
so.
And as you say, that's the knock-on effect of the pandemic, just bringing those things to the surface, is that suddenly you're more aware of those particular practical issues.
Yeah, it's sort of taking once again the best of what our technology does and being able to use all of those bits and pieces, hardware, software, the operating system itself, machine learning algorithms, all of that to create features that really support our communities.
Cool. And in terms of that, I mean, that's clearly about the innovation that you're responding to the particular situation. I'm guessing that there's a sort of a broader program of ensuring that accessibility and innovation are connected in some way, or disability. How does that work now? And I guess over time, what have the changes been to ensure that it's built in for the beginning? When someone's having a bright idea, that they begin thinking about disability and accessibility as part of that initial spark. I guess that's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that happens in a lot of ways. I mean, certainly because we have it infused in our corporate culture as a core value, it's something that people all across Apple are thinking about accessibility as a part of what they do from day one. The team gets in early on new projects, but it's also about our own employees, who are members of these communities, being able to step up and say, gosh, I really wish my device would do this. And then having cross-functional teams who bond together to figure out how to make those things happen. Another one we did, sorry, I got a little video to show as well, is called door detection. And with door detection, here, I'm running this. It's got, should have both audio descriptions and closed captioning playing as well, so.
Titles, Apple Accessibility. A woman using a white cane points an iPhone camera at the door of a bakery.
Closed door 8 feet away. Text, muffin to write home about bakery.
Titles, door detection, now on iPhone. An Apple logo.
To write home about as well. Or is that a real store?
Good question. I think we did actually come up with that to avoid any copyright issues. But yeah, some very creative people in our world there. Yeah. So I think we have a lot of people who sort of come up with ideas and then. Once again, we're trying to look at what everyone else is doing at Apple and say, gosh, is there something that we can use here? Another one that I love, the kind of same thing, this was, we are now using the hardware of the Apple Watch to be able to understand your muscle and tendon movements. So if you are someone who is upper body limb different, maybe an amputee or such, who would only be able to use the watch with one hand, you can now run the entire watch using just a pinch or a clench. So really kind of saying, all right, what's everyone else doing at Apple, and how do we go into the candy store and figure out what all those things are to be able to make our the work we do for our communities that much stronger.
So is that work that you're doing in the sense of onboarding and internal sort of training and culture? It's that sort of thing which is bringing those people together, I'm guessing. There's a sense that when people are joining that they're already in the candy store, in the sense that they're aware of all the bits around them. Is that how that program sort of develops to ensure that that's sort of front and center when they're thinking of their work?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think for any new employee when they join Apple, there is an effort to make sure that they understand what our core values are. Accessibility being certainly one of them. We're basically based on 6 core corporate values, but accessibility is a key part of that. And so for anyone who comes to Apple, we want them to understand as you do your job, even if accessibility isn't in your title, it's important for you to understand what this means to our company and to think about it in the work that you do. And that can be for anyone, whether they're an engineer, or designer, marketing, all the way to a facilities person. We want to make sure that people with disabilities are thought about in our entire process. So it's sort of that consistent drumbeat. Once you enter, you're given that overview, but then throughout time, as you work on your projects, there's always people there saying, well, what about this? And have we thought about what the experience might be for someone who might never touch a touch screen, or who might not hear the audio coming through the device at this point? How do we think about that in the design of this?
Right, so challenging back each time the assumptions and all the other parts that are built into the initial proposal and then through the process. Yeah, sounds cool. And I guess that also depends to some extent on the support for your internal teams. I mean, there's that all inward facing, the fact that it's a place where disabled people can work and thrive and flourish in the same way as all their other colleagues. I guess that's part of that.
Yeah, I mean, as the people who design the products, there's a constant flow of information and bug reports and all kinds of things as people are working, in every team. And that's one of the things I love. By building the technology, we can then create an environment where we can hire people into not just the accessibility team, but in teams across Apple. And so those individuals might, some of them may be using more things like Pages, Keynote, and Numbers for the iWork suite, and they're doing more presentations and reports. Other people may be engineers, and they're more, getting into the back-end bug reporting systems, things like that. So everybody has their own things that they work on, and therefore they're able to go then to the teams who build these and say, hey, I was working on this, and I think it would be great if we could do this additional thing, or I hit a roadblock here. How do we solve for that? And so, yeah, I love that we're just able to get the best people throughout Apple because we have the tools that are accessible right out of the box.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a bit about collaboration. Later on, it seems a long way away, Thursday, you're going to be talking to Jenny and Eve about the connections across Google and Microsoft and Apple, and I know that you guys connect and collaborate, and you'll be talking about that. What role does that collaboration play in your work generally? I mean, is there particular things you're looking for, or is it more just out there listening and seeing what comes in, or I guess a bit of both as you're going through the different programs and projects you're working on?
Yeah, I think there are certainly times where we go back to each other and say we're better together than we are apart, and that can be everything from the speech accessibility project that I know there's some folks who are going to be talking about. I think Christopher is going to be talking about that a little bit more tomorrow. But that's a great project where all of us looked at it and said, this is a problem that for any one company, it's hard to solve. There isn't a whole lot of data out there about individuals with atypical speech. So if we band together to support an organization like University of Illinois to do research, it makes it easier, if nothing else, for the community. I mean, that's the biggest part for all of us, is how do we support the community better? But we've done it in a number of circumstances already. Things like there's a Braille human interface guideline out there that was developed a number of years ago by all of not just the tech companies, but getting to the Braille display manufacturers and the screen reader creators and all of that to come together and say, what's the unique experience of someone who interacts with technology strictly through a Braille display, and how do we make sure that that becomes something seamless regardless of which operating system you're using? So I think we try and find those moments where the entire industry understands that the best outcomes are ones where there's collaboration, and then we do really like each other. So we find each other and say, how do we make this work?
Right. I've got an interesting question here from the audience. Will we ever see a standardization of tools between big providers, Microsoft, Google, and Apple? They're particularly mentioned in the EU Commission and stuff like HSBC. I mean, that's where the pressure is, I guess. In you want to be differentiating yourself, but on the other hand, some of what you described there is it's good for the user to know that this convention will be consistent. I guess that's part of the tension in the sense of commercial versus the usability or something like that. I mean, that crops up, I'm sure, all the time for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I don't know that I have a specific answer, because I think we're constantly trying to look at different elements and figure out where they're the best solutions. In that case with the Braille guidelines, it did codify one system, most specifically for Bluetooth, but across other elements as well. And so I think where we see there's real value, but things like whether it's one specific type of USB or what it might be, I mean, part of that is the industry changes not just for accessibility but for everyone all the time.
I wonder if that's easier in accessibility though, because I guess it's maybe more obvious the collaboration, the user benefit in the sense of the start of the problem solving. Is that maybe that's why that collaboration and partnership and sort of thinking about guidelines is a little bit simpler. It's like maybe less controversial or something. I don't know whether that's how it feels when you're doing it, but you probably still got the lawyers on your back asking you questions. But
yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to try and support accessibility as a bigger part of the design process of anything. So yeah.
Well, and we know we're all trying to work within WCAG, for example, all the time. All those sorts of guidelines. They're an amazing community effort to pull together so many different players and so many different elements to into some system which will probably work most times. It's sort of where we're at the moment. The reason it's being reinvented is because the technology and interfaces have moved to create them. So I guess that's where the collaboration is as well, isn't it? In those standards, in the connecting in with all the different players, not just the tech companies necessarily, but all the people using it. Like Mali was talking about the banking sector and all their services and millions of users. So I think that's certainly how we see it in AbilityNet. Is we find it easier to connect across because we're using the accessibility sort of introduction almost and saying, look, this is obviously a thing we can work on and it will be good for all of us. And the community around it is building and the connections that are there. Changing tack slightly, what sort of technologies do you think, you mentioned LiDAR, for example, what sort of technologies do you think are on the horizon in terms of the next few years and changes and not necessarily accessibility features, but more broadly the technologies that are going to bring value to people with disabilities?
Yeah. Well, I think there's certainly a lot of buzzwords out there floating around on things people think that the future holds. For me, the biggest thing that I look at is now that we've kind of built the foundational assistive technology into devices, it really is more about what is the next consumer thing and ensuring that that's accessible. Right. We no longer, and I don't say that, obviously there's always new things to make, but it's not like there is a giant area that we have left someone out. So now when we build, it's looking at how do we figure out what that next big thing is and just make sure it's accessible. And so I think one of the big ones that certainly is huge right now is around machine learning and AI. There are so many things, even as we've done with things like people detection and door detection and sound recognition and different elements of machine learning that are being used across disability types that have so much potential to make the world accessible. Once the device is accessible, you start looking at how do you then just make everything around you more accessible to you. And so I really love how much we're delving into machine learning as a way to solve that problem.
With all of those inputs from the various times. Actually, somebody's asked about the pro and the non-pro tools. I guess part of what's happening anyway is that the mainstream becomes, there's a cutting edge at any particular moment, but the mainstream, that seems to me that's happening quicker anyway. That those because of the machine learning essentially sitting in the background saying, well, what can you throw at me? All these different things. Actually, somebody was just asking, could you explain a bit on the wrist again? Because that is really interesting, I think, isn't it? It's like you wouldn't conceive that somebody could even use that input, but it's to do with the sensors on the back identifying what your muscles are doing. Is that right?
Absolutely. The feature is called Assistive Touch for Apple Watch, and you can find it in the mobility section in the settings for the watch. And what it does is, by being able to understand that sort of muscle and tendon movement, when you do a clench or a pinch, and double pinches, things like that, it will allow you to navigate. So much in the same way that kind of you would use scanning software. You can move through elements on the screen, and when you get to the one you want, you can actually, answer a phone call or start a workout on the watch, or do all kinds of things, but doing it all without having to actually touch the face of the watch.
Wow.
Yeah, that one is one that's
so
totally
it's not
sci-fi.
sort of gestural like that. It's simply the movement of the hand.
It's just when you're pinching or clenching.
Yeah. You can imagine all sorts of conditions and positions that people find themselves in where that's really important, whether related to disability or not.
That's actually been one of the fun things that we found is we have received so much feedback from people who don't self-identify as having a disability, who love the feature because they're, for example, snowboarders on the top of mountains don't want to take their gloves off, or researchers with gloves on and biological matter or God knows what, who have love it, that we actually pulled part of this out into something we call quick actions, which you can find within the accessibility settings as well, that are sort of set up so you don't have to have all of assistive touch for Apple Watch on. You can just have certain things that you want to do more quickly with just a simple hand action.
Nice.
So yeah, and that to me is also where the fun comes, is when an accessibility feature becomes so popular that the mainstream gloms onto it and starts using it as well. And then it kind of becomes the gateway to getting people more aware of what's built into our accessibility settings. And hopefully they find more things that work for them
and
too.
they pass it on as well. It's not for me, but someone I know would find that really useful.
Yeah.
I think right back to when we first chatted about you joining us, I remember we were talking about accessibility coming from two directions. So there's the mainstream features being developed that we can make use of. That's a brilliant example. And then the accessibility features being turning out to be something that people find really useful in a mainstream way. Yeah. And I think that's where we're at now, isn't it? All the technologies that are sort of swirling around us. The same with the machine learning. That's becoming ubiquitous, really, in the sense of taking all of this information from different places. So I guess looking ahead, the final question would be, do you think that the next 3 days, thinking about that and then beyond, what do you think the accessibility community should be looking at in terms of our work and our connecting up and our partnerships? Are there obvious things that we can be doing together that are going to move us forward?
Well, I think a lot of it is that connection with colleagues, certainly, to have those conversations about what can we do together, and that may be those bigger picture things. It may just be if you're someone your company is new to thinking about accessibility, and you have an app, and knowing that for whatever platform you're on, there are tools available to you to help that cause, and trying to find those tools and use them to build better products. Yeah. Certainly all of us who are in the accessibility world, we're here because we believe strongly in support of the communities. So we're all working to make resources available and to be around to help and kind of whatever can be done to make sure that we, across the industry, move accessibility forward in new ways.
Yeah, well, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, and part of it is that you flew all the way over here to be in this room, have a chat, instead of doing it on the internet again.
I'm so excited.
So it's brilliant, isn't it? And it is part of that
wonderful.
Community building, is being in the room and catching up and seeing people. You do miss that, but it's fantastic that you've done that. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It's been a great chat. It's been to hear from you, and
thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to take a short break. We'll be back at 11:30 with a panel where we're going to discuss the global picture with a load of people from around the world who are working on disability inclusion, and some really interesting stories about the differences and similarities in different places in trying to bring digital inclusion across the planet. So I look forward to that. See you in 3 minutes.